Welcome to Investigating Genesis. This episode is talking about systems thinking and biology. Now, in this session, and possibly also later ones, we will briefly investigate some scientific background to Genesis in terms of geology, cosmology, paleontology, etc. And here in this episode, we're going to start with biology. The reason is simply this. I'm a technical person. I've been working in hard operational science for many years and also in systems thinking and systems engineering. And so I'm very interested in bringing across the scientific evidence that dovetails exactly with Genesis. And it will become very evident in this talk that Genesis 1:1, in the beginning Elohim, is quite a rational statement. It is very reasonable and it doesn't conflict with science at all. So let me start on something that a very well-known atheist said. Frank Zindler, he was the president of the Atheistic Association of the United States at some stage. He said the most devastating thing that biology ever did to Christianity was the discovery of biological evolution. Well, we'll see about that. Now that we know that Adam and Eve never were real people, the central myth of Christianity is destroyed. And if there never was an Adam and Eve, there never was original sin. And if there never was original sin, there is no need for salvation. And if there is no need for salvation, there is no need of a savior. And he says, I submit that puts Jesus, historical or otherwise, into the ranks of the unemployed. I think that evolution is absolutely the death knell of Christianity. Well, that may have held back in 1856 when Darwin formulated this concept of the origin of species. But in the age of genetics and DNA, the death knell is really on the theory of evolution as the origin of all life on this planet. We'll see about that. You make up your own mind, okay? Let's have a look what we've got. Now, with my background of systems thinking and system engineering, I want to introduce you to this concept of a system. What is a system? Well, in a sense, a human body is a system consisting of many subsystems like organs and bones and nerves, etc. We can also look at the whole Earth as a system with all its physical subsystems on it, like rocks, like water, like air. We can have a look at the environment and the climate and how it impacts it. We can look at a system in any particular shape that we define. We can say an aircraft or a car is a system, but so is an engine a system, but it is a subsystem of a car. Okay, now we can look at these things in very different ways. We can have a holistic perspective, which really just means we see the bigger picture and we see the integration of all these subsystems and how they function together and how this integration maybe works. That's holistic. We can also have a hierarchical perspective, and as I alluded to the car already, if we say a car is a system, then an engine would be a subsystem, a gearbox would be a subsystem. And we could work hierarchically to consider systems. So, as I said, we can look at the details of an engine and all its subsystems that it has, like a water cooling pump, a radiator, pistons, fuel injection, whatever it might be. So I hope you understand that hierarchically we can look at systems or we can look at them holistically. And to really understand how a system works, we will have to look at it holistically. But to learn about a system and how it is broken down into subsystems, we use the hierarchical perspective. And so we must select which system of interest we're going to look at. And that's why I said today we're going to talk at biology. At some other day we talk of the system of interest, which we might call geology or cosmology or physics or mathematics, if you like. All right? That we would call the system of interest. So you're with me there conceptually. Now, 2,000 years ago, or even further back, people knew that there was a higher plane where the gods lived, okay, for the Romans and the Greeks, and there was a lower level where man did go about his daily life or her daily life. So there was a higher plane and a lower plane. And the gods lived up there, and we lived down here. And even in art and so on, you could see that in early art, very early art, the spiritual was never mixed with the ordinary human being life, if I can put it like that. So there's a higher plane and a lower plane. And of course, we called that higher plane the spiritual plane, and the plane where we live, the material plane. And as the New Testament has then shown us 2,000 years ago, the spiritual side in the Christian concept of spirituality was the Trinity, God, Jesus, His Son, and the Holy Spirit. Also, the Scripture, which was the means of communication of God to our plane where we were. And of course, we also had the church there. Now, all these concepts are really on a higher plane, but that line that separates the two became more and more penetrable, because we see today that the spiritual side is not so distinctly separate from the material side. More about that a bit later. But on the material side, also in the Age of Enlightenment, as it is called, and the Industrial Revolution and so on, physics was on the lower side and could explain a lot of phenomena in nature. And the moment we had our maths together, we saw that mathematics and physics and nature talks to each other, if I can put it like that, conceptually very, very well. We can predict a lot of behavior in nature through physics and the mathematics related to it. Cosmology, which is different to astronomy, by the way. Astronomy looks at the stars and the solar system and so on, and cosmology is really about deep space and the origin of the cosmos. There's geology, which is mainly concerned with the rocks on this planet and how our Earth is shaped by glaciers and water and air and erosion and this and that, and the different types of rocks, of course. And there is, for example, a system of interest called biology. And biology, we can look at different aspects of biology. We can look at the human biology as a system of interest, but that again consists of many subsystems, like the skeletal system, the muscular system, the circulatory system, the respiratory system, the reproductive system, the digestive system, and so on. There are many subsystems in the human system. We can do that hierarchically, or we can do it holistically. Well, if we don't do it holistically, it isn't very useful, is it? Because if you have a problem with blood circulation and that isn't sorted out, it doesn't matter what you do, then you will probably die or be dead already. Anyway, more about that later. We also have the animal system. Now, the animal biology is very similar to humans. It's similar, but not identical. There are very big differences, especially if it comes to neural activity, if it comes to the mind, if it comes to our way of being able to think rationally and have concepts like mathematics in our head, which animals cannot do. We also have language and appreciation of art and possibly appreciation of beautiful sunsets or experiences. And then there's, of course, this point in biology called origin. Are we created, or is it just a random and materialistic idea? Is it rather a random and materialistic concept, evolution, for example, of how we all came about, how all the biology came about, in fact how the whole cosmos came about. But let's look at biology in some detail, which then gives us the question, if there is so much information involved as we see on the cellular level and in genetics, information is always related to intelligence, right? Let's see where that takes us. Let's see. And what we have noticed, of course, in the last couple of decades, especially from the 1900s onwards, is that materialism, in the form of the philosophy of atheism, has now usurped the higher level and pushed the spiritual level right down into meaninglessness, because it is perceived by the atheist that there is no God, there is no need for God. So let's have a look at the hierarchical perspective, because that is the one we are all used to. Knowledge and skills are taught at detail level from school all the way to tertiary education like universities, etc. Okay? And I want to illustrate it like this. At the lowest level of mathematics, let's say arithmetic, we teach our children 1 + 1 is 2, or 2 + 5 is 7. And those numbers are understood. Kids learn how to count, and that's arithmetic. We have 4 operators there later, of course. It's plus, minus, multiplying and dividing, but that's pretty limited. The next level is when we can say, well, here's a number x, we don't know what it is, but it consists of 2 or 3 or 5 other numbers that we add up and subtract, etc. So if a is a 2 and b is a 5, then we have x equals 7. And so we take the students later in high school to a function of x, which we call y, and those function of x could be plotted on a graph. It could be a straight line, a hyperbola, it could be a parabola, it could be any shape of line that could be expressed mathematically. And then, of course, at the very highest level, maybe at university and beyond, you don't even know what the function is. Let's call it g. There is a g up there. But we are investigating that with a hypothesis, and string theory in cosmology may be something like that. And we think it could be there because the mathematics says it could be there, but we see no evidence for it. So this is hierarchical development of our skill of mathematics, for example. And it is mostly analytical. It is focused on the detail. And what I want you to know is, or notice, analytical can only be done on stuff that's already there. You can only be analytical about something that is already there. So we are describing what we see there. Understand? Now, design thinking is very different. It requires systems thinking and critical thinking. It is top down from the concept. It is holistic because we got to look at many, many areas. And it uses synthesis. And synthesis is creative. Let me give you an example. An architect is thinking of what a new building could look like, a new bridge could look like. Now, that is the final. Actually, in the hierarchical, it would be at the top. Now we have to break that down and do synthesis of concepts that make this top system possible. The design of a motor car, a new electric self-driving motor car, would require a lot of synthesis because it's not there yet. It's something creative. It is something where we have to look from the top down. It is no good designing a new motor if we don't know yet where we're going to apply it, like an electric car, for example. So I don't want to go too deep into engineering here. I'm just trying to show you that engineering is hard operational science. And if it is design and development, you've got to develop systems and critical thinking. And it is synthesis thinking. But of course, the analysis of the stuff that's there already is also very important. Let's look at engineering. from an idea or a vision and a goal, we could think up a new type of car. And God in Genesis describes He wants a perfect planet with beautiful stuff in it and people on it. And where do you start? Well, on day one, He says, okay, let me create the heaven and the earth is just water. There's not much on it. There's not much to go by. Now we got to, compared to a car, we can see the shape of the car that we want, but we have no details yet. Now we go from this idea in engineering to systems design, and we say, okay, what is the purpose of this thing? What is the technology that we got to apply in this? Are there specific materials that are new or still have to be invented, and so on? And in Genesis, what God does in the first couple of days is He first creates this planet called Earth. He separates land from water and air, and those are basic materials with which to work further. Now the engineer, to go back to that subsystem of the car, now we know the purpose, we need subsystems, like a fuel system. How's the safety going to be if human beings are in there? How are human beings going to interface with this car? And God in Genesis has now to create the right conditions. He creates vegetation in all its detail, but the vegetation is there first, and the sun and the moon and the stars on day 3 and 4, and He does that in the way He builds up this design, this creative design that He's got in His mind already. And in engineering, from the fuel and human interface and safety is just a couple of examples. We go to products as a system or subsystem, like the engine, like the electrics, like the gearbox, like the differential. And God, what does He do in Genesis? In day 5 and 6, He creates now sea creatures that live in the water, flying creatures that live in the air, and eventually also humans. Okay? And there's lots and lots of design detail which makes the above functional and purposeful. But now we've got something that is complete. It is holistically complete. Because you also have to remember there are a lot of details that still have to be designed. The valve assembly, for example, for the engines, the radiator, the lubrication, the fuel pumps, and so on. And what did God have to do? When He created land animals and flying creatures and humans, He had to think of the skeleton as a subsystem. What is a wing going to do, and how is it going to do it? And the feathers, etc. And all the organs that are in all the animals and all the human beings. And the brain, how's that going to work? And all the sub-assemblies, if I can call it that, that are in a human body. And you see, in engineering, we have to go further down and further down to pistons and copper wire and valves, how they're made, out of what material, and the fan belt, or whatever we might need. And God, again, had to, in one fell swoop, had to put in the right tissue in the body, the right muscles, the bones, the cilia, those little tiny hairs that are lining your intestines and your ear, cochlea, to pick up sound, etc. And the whole nervous system and the nerves specifically and how they will function, and the blood vessels, etc., etc. And in the end, it comes right down to materials in engineering, metal, plastic, glass, leather, whatever we're going to use in this car. And in biology, we need to look at how the cell's going to work. You and I consist of 100 million individual cells, and they're not just blobs, as Charles Darwin thought in 1856. There are amino acids in there that do certain jobs. There's a lot of biochemistry going on there. There's an ion exchange across the membranes of all the cells and everywhere in the body. There's a thing called metabolism, etc. It just never ends. And there are processes involved to make this whole assembly, this whole system actually work. In a car, it would be, we have to paint this thing. We have to have quality control. We have to test if this functionality that we expected this car to have is really there. And God created the ATP production, that's the energy production in each cell, how proteins are going to be built, the immune system, how that's going to work, the DNA itself, how that's going to be produced, arranged, packaged, etc. And here's another amazing thing. This subsystem this system called human being still has to be self-healing. So you've got to work that into that whole system, that all these separate subsystems in a human being and in an animal have to also enable this organism, this system, to heal itself. We haven't got that right yet with a laptop, have we? Or our cars. There's no self-healing. The evidence of top-down in creation is quite evident to a guy like me with my background. From goal and purpose, God moves to detailed design right down to DNA. First, the earth, then separating the water from the land. Day 3, having vegetation. And day 4, the sun and the moon and the stars. Day 5, we have the flying creatures. We have the creatures in the sea. And day 6, all the land animals. All the land animals. And were they days, proper days? Well, we've done that in the first series, or in the first course already, where we defined what sort of day are we talking about. But you see, when God created, he had to create all the hierarchical detail at the same time. So God did it holistically and hierarchically, and of course all human analogies and pictures are always very weak when it comes to God, because God is all-powerful, all-knowing. He didn't sit there and think about it and added the DNA a little later or something. He just spoke it and it became. Now, I know for human beings that is unthinkable. How can that be? And for an atheist, he would use it as an argument for there is no God, because how can somebody just snap his fingers or say a word and there it is? Well, that is the description we have in Scripture, that is how God did it. Now, let's focus on the human biology again. We've talked about this, the skeletal system and so on. But I just want to tell you, in that human being, there are many systems of interest. And if you look at the medical profession, you get a specialist for each one of those subsystems. The skeletal system, the muscular system, the circulatory system, the neurological system, the brain, the respiratory system, the digestive system, the reproductive system. For each one of those and many more, we have specialists who studied for years and specialized in one particular aspect of these systems of interest. You see what I'm getting at? And the fundamentals at detail levels are so complicated. No, they are so complex that if you look at cellular metabolism, that is another Pandora's box of scientific detail that is absolutely indescribable. And how that could have happened randomly by accident is really not rational. But more about that later. Look at the fundamentals of detailed blood supply and diffusion. How these 120,000 kilometers of blood vessels in your body, yes, you heard that right, 120,000 kilometers in your body, how they pump the blood from the heart through the aorta to the arteries, to the arterioles, to the capillaries, and all the way back again to oxygenate it and to accept the glucose from the food that the digestive system had to process in a suitable format. The performance that we have as human beings, physically and mentally, it's amazing. The maintenance of our bodies, to keep it healthy, is not something you and I do consciously very much, except maybe eat an apple a day or something and do a bit of exercise. But the body is looking after our health, not you, and I say it with respect, not the doctor either. Repairs, of course, medical science can help a lot with alleviating ailments, but it is still the body's own resources that actually do the healing. And of course, the immune system is a prevention subsystem. so that you don't get a bacteria or a virus like we have now, or if you get it, that the body can actually fight it. And there's genetics and information and the balance of the biochemistry. You know that if you don't feel well, they do a blood test right away. And these days they can take hundreds of parameters of your blood and figure out, in many cases, exactly what's wrong with you. And it is the balance of the biochemistry in the blood. And of course, there's the amazing, amazing concept of reproduction and even growth. How a baby grows in the womb, how a baby grows to become a toddler, to become a teenager, to become an adult. Those things we take for granted, but you can't take it for granted if you look at the details. And we're not going to go into all that. We're going to stay at a more superficial level at the beginning, and then we just look at some of the amazing detail. But I want to show you that it is irrational to think that it could have happened randomly and accidentally, and that Genesis 1:1 is quite profound and true. Now, the human organism, that's an amazing thing for an engineer. The human body is self-regulating. I'm not regulating my blood pressure consciously, or my digestion, or my hormonal levels, or my insulin levels, anything like that. The body is doing it. My body temperature is not determined by me. The body is doing it. It's also a very networked system, because if I have a problem with my foot, the whole body knows about it. If I have a toothache, my whole body knows about it. It goes even further. If I just had a fight with my wife, my whole body knows about it. It's networked. It's also an optimizing entity, because when the body has to run 100 meters for physical exercise, it actually allocates the blood to the muscles that are involved in this particular athletic activity. It's also optimized in many other ways, on a chemical detail level. And as I already alluded to, self-healing is capable of healing itself, provided it has the right resources in terms of food, in terms of locomotion or physical exercise, in terms of all sorts of things that encourage self-healing. And of course, in human beings, we have a spiritual dimension as well, which I doubt very much animals have, but that may be a debate for some other time. But there is a spiritual dimension in human beings. Every human being, even the atheist, is looking for something to give him purpose, to give her a meaning of life. And if they don't find it in God or Jesus or even Buddha, they will find it in atheism, which is a religion, let's face it. It's a belief concept. And but later also more about that. The thing on human beings and the human organism is we are mobile. We are not like trees or plants. We have a metabolism which changes from hour to hour, to day, and age from year to year. And we have a mind. We have a rational and reasonable, in most cases, mind. We can think. So the mobility gives us the ability to roam around quite freely. The metabolism also is a part in the reproduction and the growth. And our mind, of course, gives us the possibility to reason. And this is what we're busy doing here. I'm not trying to win an argument. I've said that at the beginning of the Genesis series. I say it again. I'm not showing you all this to win an argument. I'm showing you this so that you make up your own mind what is more rational and reasonable to believe. Let's continue. At the highest system level then, scientific fundamentals of biological life are relatively simple if you understand those details. For the guy who studied this all their lives, for the woman who studied this all their lives, this is not difficult. For people like you and me, it is difficult. But if you read more about it, you get more respect for it and you will understand more. So to achieve optimum health, and thus performance mentally and physically. We require nutrients, we require oxygen, we require good blood circulation. So it's food, water, and air. We require a cellular metabolism that converts nutrients and oxygen to energy. We will go into that in a moment, because without energy, no work can be done. These 100 trillion cells of your body are all working. They're working very hard at a very, very complex level. And without energy, they could not function. And then they die. So if there is no energy, the medical term is death. So we need energy to function for 100 trillion cells. There must be ions. Ions are electrically charged particles. They must be pumped across the cellular membrane constantly. Otherwise, those cells will die. Proteins must be built at an extremely high rate and with extreme accuracy. Uncorrected genetic errors during this building process will create mutations. Now, here's a big surprise that the atheists never tell you about. These mutations are cumulative over generations and will result in something called genetic entropy, which just means things are running down because there are more and more negative mutations. And that practically means extinction in the long run. Now, extinction is in a sense programmed into living beings, but not just there. We can see it in this word entropy, which means the cooling down of the universe, the cooling down of your coffee if you just leave it standing in the room, the slow cooling down and running down of everything. Now, evolution preaches exactly the opposite. And it says it's getting better and better and better. There is no evidence for that, no practical evidence whatsoever. And evolution is really a pathetic fallacy because it is a non-event. It is a non-event. And scripture, this is a Christian series, okay? So let me show you what scripture says. Yes, I know it's an old book, but it's amazingly consistent, and it's not a surprise if the living God who created the whole universe and you and me has actually dictated these things, and they are written down by humans, that's true, but they're inspired by God. You can read these yourself, but he says, let us make man in our image and our likeness, and let them rule over everything on this planet. In Hebrews 1:10, we are also told, in the beginning the Lord laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the works of your hands. They will perish, entropy here. But you remain. They will wear out like a garment, entropy. All men are like grass, and all their glory is like flowers in the field. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of the Lord stands forever. Sounds a bit like entropy too, isn't it? You rebuke and discipline men for their sin. You consume their wealth like a moth. Because what is wealth for a human being? You can't take it with you. Each man is but a vapor. That is how the Bible puts it. And if you're a bit older, like me, you see that life is really like a vapor. When you're 20 or 40 or 50 or even 60, you think you still got a long time to live. Not so true. Not so true. The times are very short. So, the Psalm 39 says, you have made my days a mere handbreadth. The span of your years is nothing before you. Each man's life is but a vapor. And of course, what is also, I put that in the center there, I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And your works are wonderful. I know that full well. Well, today's world doesn't know that full well anymore because they think, because they can explain something in nature scientifically that makes them the creators of this. That's not true. There's a big difference between discovering something that already exists and making something that has, up to this point, not existed. Okay, let's have a look at some of that detail. We have a circulatory system, heart, lungs, highways and byways, as I said already. It forms the supply and waste removal highway of the body. It's just one of those amazing subsystems. It's the highway for the immune system also, by the way, and all sorts of material that flows in the blood. And that's what the pathologists and the labs actually analyze to see what's wrong with you. These other materials that are all flowing around in your blood. But there's got to be an uninterrupted flow, and the proper diffusion to the various organs is of paramount importance. Because if you don't get enough blood to your brain, you either become unconscious, or you get a stroke, or you die. And as I said already, there are 120,000 kilometers. That is three times around the earth in terms of blood vessels packed into a single person. That's been measured, although I don't know who the volunteer was that they did it on. At lower systems level, biological life is not so simple. If you now go into the exact detail, or the precise detail, then life is a bit of a miracle. Because remember, all the components of these subsystems in the final analysis consist of material substances. Everything that's in the table of elements that you learned in chemistry and have already forgotten, that makes up those living bodies. Here is just a picture of all, or not all, of some of the subsystems, the critical subsystems. Blood in itself, the skin itself is an amazing organ. It's the biggest organ. It's, I don't know exactly, 5 square meters or 10 square meters of skin on your body. There's the nervous system, the brain, the heart, the pancreas, the kidney, the stomach, the sperm, the egg, and the female, the bone, the muscle, the intestine, the liver, the lungs. If you look at those subsystems individually, they're complex as it is. But if you take just one, let's say the liver, and you look at it in detail, I want to point out these diagrams are diagrams that had to be developed by very intelligent humans in studies that led over years, how the liver cell processes work, and we can see chemically what's going on and the exchange via the cellular membrane and all these things. Very complex. And this, by the way, is a functional flow diagram of all the things that are happening in the liver. It probably took 20 or 100 PhD students to figure this out. This is very difficult. Now here's the amazing thing. Your liver and my liver knows what to do. It has never seen this diagram. It just knows how to do it. Now how can that happen randomly, accidentally? Let me tell you, if one of these arrows is missing, one of these squares is missing, you have a liver ailment. It's that simple, and it's that profound, and that complex. Just let that go through your head. So we can look later, or you can look later on YouTube, search for protein building and the Keynesian linear motor. You'll be amazed what's going on in each cell of your body. And if you look at the cell, this is a schematic of a cell. Look at all the subsystems within the cell. The mitochondrion, which is your power station, that's the Eskom, except it works much better. We have the Golgi apparatus, where much of the heavy lifting is taking place. We have the nucleus of the cell, and we have all these funny constructs. You know, it takes an expert and lifelong work, probably 40, 50 years, to even understand one of these aspects in detail. Oh, it happened accidentally, by mutation. Oh, good luck. Because unless this whole thing is working from the beginning, it's not working. I've already told you. Here's your body. 100 million cells are working together, building between 80,000 and 400,000 different proteins by copying the appropriate DNA section like a blueprint to know what it has to build and which protein it has to build. It transcribes it, it's a long process, and translates it and populates it with the right sequence of amino acids, of which there are only 20, but they have to be sort of put up like pearls on a string in the right order. Otherwise, that protein is not going to work. So there are trillions and trillions and millions of trillions of chemical reactions going on in your body. You don't even know about it, but they are very precise. If that precision isn't there, you run to a doctor if you still have time. So this is a self-healing, self-regulating, optimizing system that no human being can even copy. Let me show you this thing with the amino acids. There are 20 different amino acids. I put them here as sticks. They actually look a bit like this on molecular level, okay, also schematic. But the amino acid molecules come in 20 different types. I put them in different colors. Now here's the big thing. They look a bit like this, the right-handed ones and the left-handed ones. In a lab, if you make amino acids, you will get that right, but you make 50% left-handed ones, just like we have 50% left-handed hands and 50% right-handed hands, okay? Now, each amino acid comes as a left hand or a right hand. Do you know that living beings only left-hand ones? Now, you do not get that right in a lab. It's always 50-50, all right? So, what is the big role of these amino acids? These amino acids get, according to a protein that has to be made, it looks in the DNA, where's that section for that protein, number 1713, and it looks, there's the building program. Which amino acids do I need to put in a specific sequence to make that protein? Here's a picture on the left bottom there, where you see the protein consisting of all these amino acids, and it can be thousands and tens of thousands of amino acids put in the right sequence, folded in a very particular way, and in detail it looks like this, people, and like that for a hemoglobin molecule. I can tell you, if this hemoglobin molecule is not built properly by means of proteins that were specifically manufactured in the cell, you have maybe sickle cell anemia or some other blood disease, because then the hemoglobin cannot absorb and accept the oxygen and release it again in the capillary at the right place. That's a long story as well, which we're not going to cover now. But here's a simplified human cell. I made it a little bit simple on this diagram. You see still the nucleus here, and you see the mitochondria, the power station. In those power stations, there are little energy generators. I depicted them here by these red dots. And mitochondria are the power stations that provide the energy for the work that is done by the cell. And in a complex biological process, it then converts sugar to useful chemical energy. Let me show you what that looks like. Every cell has millions of these little generators. They are rotating engines that generate a chemical called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and that stuff is the actual life energy, the chemical that produces the energy so that the cells can do their work, that your muscles can do their work, that even your brain can do its work, and they are critical in reproduction as well. They give energy there. You see, these little rotors rotate at enormous speeds, and they don't use electrons like our electricity, they use protons. That is hydrogen ions. A lot of detail in there. You don't want to know. The nice thing is there's no exam after this. Just let it flow over you. What I'm saying is true, and you must decide later if that can all happen randomly, accidentally. What this little motor needs is oxygen and nutrients, and they are supplied by the blood circulation. And they're rotating day and night, day and night. The medical term for them not rotating en masse means you're dead. This energy molecule, adenosine triphosphate, looks a bit like this, and that is the energy that is required from the oxygen and the nutrients to rotate it, to convert it to ATP, and this chemical is produced at the rate of about body weight per day. You say, well, can't be because I don't get any heavier. Well, not from that, because ATP is used up the moment it is generated by these little machines. It is used up at cellular level right away. Okay, and the waste products are then transported by your bloodstream back through the liver, etc. So building you is another enormously complex process. If you look at conception with two cells, there's the female egg cell and the male sperm cell. Only one of them is necessary, or actually wanted, to create this new being. Can you see these pictures? This is how it starts. Two cells, then a cluster of cells. Then we have we have these pictures in sequence, and you see 42 days, and we see 8 months, and in the end you have children and you have adults. Isn't that amazing? We are truly fearfully and wonderfully made. Man, if people cannot appreciate that, I can't help them. But of course, the materialist and the atheist thinks the universe is only made up of matter and energy. And Einstein even developed an equation for that, E equals mc squared. Okay? What we tend to forget conveniently is you need a lot of information to put this matter and this energy together in a functional system. How do you get from the motor car parts to a motor car that is functional? You needed to add intelligence and purpose, and for that you needed information. And information is never figures in the equation of life by atheists. But you need a lot of information, as we have seen already. And the blueprint of all this that is happening in your body and in my body is the DNA. The blueprint of how to build proteins and who you are in a sense is the genome, the human genome, by which all information is transmitted from one generation to the next, so that living things produce after their own kind. Bara. You need the genome of all these animals, the blueprint of every living creature, and it is defined by the DNA. Now, you've seen pictures like that. We're not going to be specialists after this, but I just wanted to show you. This DNA, you know, it consists of these 4 compounds, ATCG, and if you extract the DNA out of a chromosome, then for every third of a millimeter there are about 1 million connections. 1 million connections. And by analogy of letters, this represents a book of 3 billion words, or 3 million pages with 1,000 words on each page, in each cell. So that's quite a thick book. Okay? Now, let's have a look at this human genome, which is that complete book with the 3 billion letters. And you've heard the word genome before, the human genome. That's the whole book of humans and you and me, each one in there. An individual's genotype is the totality of the individual's hereditary material. So these pages look a bit like this. Now, if that contains a lot of information, then you must admit somebody must have put it there. Because if some of these letters inside this page are incorrect, we have a mutation, remember? Most mistakes we see in a printed book, we call misprints, right? And a mutation is usually a misprint. It is very seldom that a word, by just changing one letter, has a new meaning that is a more positive meaning and would explain the content of the page better than a random letter that has been changed. Now, the genotype includes all your characteristics. A single gene is often more than 10,000 of these nucleotides long. And sometimes it's 100,000 that are strung up in a gene. Chromosomes, again, collect these genes in structures, and they are packaged in a cell, and we have a whole lot of chromosomes. We get to that in a moment. But my point is really that the DNA is put into smaller nucleotides, and those are put into genes, are put into the genotype, are put into the human genome. That all has to work. The DNA is only 4 letters. You know that our language has 26 letters, if I remember correctly, and we can write books like that, but we need 24 or 26 letters rather, 26 letters. And we can write novels, we can write fiction, we can write a book on genetic entropy. Okay? But here we're only using 4 letters, or God rather is using only 4 letters. And look what happens. There's the DNA and the nucleotides. They are rolled up into tiny little balls like that, balls into little coils, and the coils become coiled upon coil like this, and they make chromosomes. So now you've understood, from DNA we get to genes, we get to chromosomes. Okay? Now the chromosomes themselves, there are 24 of them, have very specific functions. And half of the content of that comes from your mother and the other half from your father. Okay? And they have been numbered for those who study this type of thing. And there are 2 that are very interesting. The X and the Y chromosome. You've probably heard of it because Y makes you a male and 2 X's makes you a female. Now, that's all. But in this chromosome, there are a lot of these things. Okay? So there's another depiction of all this. The chromosome is always drawn a little bit like this. You see that? And so here we've got the gene. It becomes something in the chromosome. There are many chromosomes, and the genome is that whole thing of all the chromosomes together, and they're all sitting in the core of your cells. Each cell, every cell, you've got the blueprint of all this whole genome. They are put in different colors here for a reason. I'll come back to that. But here's the amazing thing. In these chromosomes, at the ends, you have something which I may or may not have understood properly, but it's called a telomere. And this telomere is a counter that counts the cell divisions. So every time this cell divides, and all our cells divide and are renewed continuously. This body is not the same that you had last year. If you don't believe it, look in the mirror. But these chromosomes have this counter. And I have understood, but I'm not sure that that is correct, when these counters hit 0, because all the divisions that this cell can make, then this particular cell dies because it cannot divide any longer. And then I just wanted to show you, this all looks pretty, let's say, 2-dimensional, which it is. But they have now discovered that if you take the chromosomes and you pack them together like this into the genome, they are actually organized like this 3-dimensionally, and parts of an individual chromosome, let's say chromosome number 3, is actually in more than one part. It is over here and over here and over there, and it is different for a youngster to a middle-aged to an older person. And that these chromosomes actually communicate with each other for different circumstances, for different times in our lives, or phases, should I rather say, in our lives. And that is time dependent, and 3D is all included in this package. Oh, it just happened randomly, right? Right? Well, I tell you what, you got more faith if you believe that than any Christian. Any Christian. Because if you believe that this all happens randomly and by accident, I wish you luck. So let's just summarize, if one can even summarize this. And how does it relate to Genesis? Well, point one, a spontaneous generation of life has never been observed. Now they're looking for it on Mars and other planets and other moons of planets. And I would be very surprised. I don't think they will ever find anything like that, because spontaneous generation of life has never been observed, not even on this planet, which is teeming with life. Number, the DNA molecule cannot be replicated by combining the constituent chemicals in a lab. It can't be done. This is a very unique thing. Number three, the complexity of building a protein, the machinery involved, and this to the tune of building about 18,000 million proteins per second, is absolutely awesome. It must involve a designer. That system could not have just spontaneously developed. Surely. Mathematically, the probability of building even one simple protein consisting only of 100 amino acids, which is very, very little, and without the correct folding involved, which is another story of complexity, is about 1 in 10 to the 22. Now, if you're unfamiliar with that, it means a 1 with 22 zeros. Now, that is a number that is really big, because 100 trillion is only 10 to the power 14. Elohim, the Creator God, sorted all this out. And he sorted it out between day 3 and 6. Sorted it out. He said it and it was there. The ATP generators are designed. Surely these little rotating engines, of which there are millions, and they rotate at an amazing rate, and they are electric proton motors. And then fifthly, the one that the whole evolution rests on is mutations. And you know that negative mutations, these letter errors at DNA level, are predominant about 1,000 to 1 good one. And they are cumulative from generation to generation. I have all the negative mutations of my parents and my grandparents and their ancestors in me. Just think about that. You've got all your ancestors' negative mutations in your body. They're in the chromosome. They're sitting there. All right? This means humankind and animals are not evolving to higher forms, as the evolutionists would like us to believe, but are seriously deteriorating from generation to generation. There's proof of that. This is not, as somebody once said to me, that's a fallacy that the creationists have thought up. No. Science has discovered that. Okay? And there is no scientific literature for molecular evolution of a complex biochemical system anywhere to be found. Here are two graphs that I just want to put up here lastly. There's a declining lifespan over the years from Noah to today. The lifespan is not increasing. Yes, medical science can improve quality of life, but most people still die between 70 and 80. Yes, you get the occasional one that gets to 119 or 14 or whatever. Declining fitness is a concept that comes out of genetic entropy, and fitness here doesn't mean physical fitness. It just means how we are genetically getting unfitter. In other words, more and more negative mutations. You know, we're only down to, if you take Genesis by its word, we're only about 300 generations from that time. And the curve fits beautifully in the loss of fitness at the genetic level and in the lifespans. So you can ignore that, that's fine. Some people ignore gravity. Some people ignore that the earth is a ball and not flat. You can do that. But there are consequences in believing the wrong stuff. So let me conclude. Design is simply the purposeful arrangement of parts. But purposeful, that word already implies thinking. It implies intelligence. It implies information. So it's a top-down process. Life on Earth at its most fundamental level, in its most critical components, is surely the product of intelligent activity. And Genesis 1 showed us how it was created, and modern operational science shows us how it works. There's a difference. Genesis 1 shows you how it was created, and operational science shows you how it works. Indeed, for the extreme fine-tuning in biology alone, never mind all these other subsystems we haven't even touched, a supernatural intelligence is undeniable. Believing anything else, I think you're fooling yourself. Evolution as a scientific hypothesis, contrary to that president of the American Atheistic Society, is absolutely irrational and unreasonable. And in the light of Scripture, it is a fact that this evolution did not happen. In fact, evolution is one of the biggest lies that is still around. It's a little bit like astrology used to be, you know. There are fewer and fewer people believing in astrology, and there is no scientific basis for it whatsoever. But its evolution will go the same way. It is completely discredited with a modern science called genetics. So, when you look at all this complexity, all this, then I want to ask you, is that a random accident? In that case, you really have a lot of faith. And I don't have the faith to be an atheist. I must tell you that. Have a look at that YouTube movie here that I put down there. And thank you very much for listening. As I said, there is no exam at the end of this. But it wouldn't be a mistake to go through it again. And I hope it wasn't boring. Thank you very much.